Hey everybody, welcome to the hptuners live stream training class. My name is Alex Peitz of Peitz Performance Tunes, and I'm going to be your instructor for the day. Today we're going to be covering the VCM Editor and introducing you to some of its functionality and some of its features to help you get you more acclimated to the VCM Editor. Also, be sure to listen close because at the end of the class, we will be asking a question. And the first person to answer this question correctly is going to win an NPVI-2, including 2 credits. So that's definitely pretty exciting. I'm pretty excited to share with you some of this knowledge, some of this information, and let's get right to it, guys. All right. So first and foremost, we're going to talk about the purpose of the VCM editor. So the purpose of the editor is to actually make changes and flash the car, and then we can use the scanner, which we discussed a couple weeks ago, to see how those changes affected the car and see how the vehicle is running, collect that data, analyze that data, and then make more additions, or excuse me, modifications in the VCM editor. So it's kind of a cycle that you go through as you're tuning the car to get it dialed in. So really the purpose of the editor is just to make those changes and to flash it. So more on the editor itself. Obviously, the editor has been around since the inception of hptuners. Now, it's definitely morphed over time. It's obviously improved, gotten better, more features have been added, and wow, I mean, the amount of functionality you have nowadays to be able to make adjustments to a wide range of parameters and applications is unreal. I mean, initially, it was more so GM vehicles, and then it's kind of, we've added Ford, Dodge, Mercedes, Volkswagen, Audi, and so on and so forth. And as hptuners has added more and more applications, more and more platforms being supported, they've also added more and more tools. And we're going to talk about those tools today and try to show you and introduce you how to use those tools to better suit your needs when you need to actually go into the vehicle. So it just really comes down to the amount of parameters which are here, which are available, and the tools which we have at our disposal to be able to make proper adjustments and properly tune the vehicle from step A to step Z. Some of those tools you may be familiar with or may have seen before include the virtual VE editor, include the inverse torque calculator for the Fords, also the inverse electronic throttle angle desired table, to name a few. Also, one of the newest things out there is the neural network trainer, which is also going to help you tune the Dodges much more effectively, much more precisely. So these are just all some tools at your disposal, and there's many more than that even yet. So that's really awesome how much we've come along and been able to help you guys have all the tools you need, right? So moving forward, I want to discuss tab view versus tree view. If you guys have used other softwares in the past, a lot of softwares traditionally use what's called tree view. And tree view is pretty simple. You have a list of different categories in the tune, and then you have subcategories below that. Once you click on that main category, it has a drop down, and I'm going to show you guys what that looks like here right now. So if we actually go to the Edit tab, and we go to Navigator, this is basically what tree view looks like. So if we click on engine, that's our big category, right? Our large main category. Then under engine, you have general, you have idle, airflow, exhaust, spark, so on and so forth. So if we click on spark, then you're gonna see advance, retard, dwell, knock sensor, and a bunch of other subcategories below that. So that's traditionally how a lot of tuning softwares lay out the parameters for you to be able to adjust, which works really well. There's nothing wrong with it. A lot of people are used to this. Now, hptuners traditionally has used what's called tab view, which tab view has, just as it's called, tabs, right? So you have a main tab, and then under that tab, you have sub tabs or subcategories, just like we have here, Spark, then we have Advanced, and then you have Base, and then you have your actual tables under there. So if we go to our traditional view or way of viewing hptuners VCM editor, you're going to see engine right here, and you click on engine. If you go to engine, you're going to see Spark, and under Spark, you're going to see Advance, and then under Base, you have your high octane. So I've really used hptuners a long time, so I'm I'm very used to tab view versus tree view. So actually I used hptuners before a lot. I tune a lot of use a lot of other softwares. So going to other softwares, I was adapting my way of looking at it using tree view versus tab view. So it really depends on your background is what I'm trying to say. And so, once you start using the tab view, it gets very it becomes second nature, really. So I really prefer tab view, honestly. But nonetheless, hptuners is giving you the ability to view it one way or view it another, depending on how you prefer to view the data. So that's pretty cool. All right. So moving forward, we have our edit tab, which we're going to discuss a lot of different features under the edit tab. All right. So the first one I want to discuss is what's called the virtual volumetric efficiency editor, or virtual VE editor, if you want to call it that. So if you go under the edit tab and click on virtual volumetric efficiency, you're going to see a table pop up. And this table is a representation of the airflow model, or the cylinder fill, based on different or varying RPMs and varying pressure ratio, which is manifold pressure divided by barometric pressure. So you guys may be used to manifold pressure. Now this is similar to that, but different. And so it actually keeps it a little more consistent, depending on where you're at. Okay, so based on whatever pressure ratio you're seeing. So let's say we're at sea level right now. So 1.0 pressure ratio is going to be basically wide open throttle in a car. Now, if it's boosted, you're going to go above 1.0 pressure ratio, and then that will be fine. So for this particular case, in the virtual VE editor, we can change our scales around to suit our needs, right? Because this is not a table from the car. This is a tool which hptuners has developed and given you the ability to use. Now, as a default, it typically is going to show from from 0.1 to 1.0 pressure ratio, right? So if we scroll down, you see it only goes to 1.0 pressure ratio. Now, you guys may say, well, this is an LT4. Just by the way, this is a file from my 2017 Chevrolet Corvette Z06, which is an LT4, which, as you guys may know, has a supercharger. So this particular table is not scaled to our specific needs. So to change that, you can actually click right here where it says map divided by baro, which is pressure ratio. And then you can change the scaling right here. There's default scaling for 2-bar, for 3-bar, which you can select from depending on what your needs are. Now, for the sake of just showing you how this works, we're just going to select 0.1 to 2.0 pressure ratio, or 2-bar, right? So now you see where it's rescaled. What's really awesome about the virtual VE editor is you actually don't lose any resolution. So if we take the 3-bar, it's just going to add more table or more cells to that table. So we're just going to be able to make more modifications precisely where we need to. If you guys have tuned some of the older controllers in the past, you may have realized that sometimes you do not gain resolution. Like on a P59 controller, let's say in a 2004 Chevy Silverado, if I do a 2-bar custom OS, I'm not going to gain that resolution. That resolution is going to stay the same, but it's going to reduce. The amount of cells is going to stay the same. So our resolution overall is going to be reduced. So we're going to lose the ability to fine tune that car to a certain extent. Is it affecting you? Probably not for the most part, but it's just something to keep in mind, something to consider. So now we've changed our scaling to 2.0 pressure ratio. We can also change our engine speed scaling, or our x-axis scaling, but we really don't need to. It's already going 6,400 RPM, and for purposes of showing you how this works, not really needed. So we can also click right here into vertical split, and then we can see where you can look at a 3-dimensional table as well as the 2-dimensional table. So that's extremely helpful for when we're making adjustments here. We can actually see it affect it over here in the 3D table. So let's just say that I wanted to increase the whole table by 10%. So I multiply by 1.1, and now you see every cell changes. That means you've made an adjustment. But obviously everything's scaled up at proportionally, so you didn't see that really change in the 3D table, but you would. What's also cool is you can left click and drag the 3D table values, and you can see it change as you're moving it around. If you right click and rotate, you can look at the 3D table from different angles to make sure that everything's smooth or progressive, and you don't have any strange peaks or valleys, which may affect how the car runs ultimately. So a lot of different features there. I can click on calculate coefficients, and that will actually change the values in the tune file. Again, this is a tool. This is a third-party tool. So this is not an actual VE table that's housed in the tune file. This is just enabling us to view it in a more traditional sense or fashion so we can make adjustments and it will affect the actual coefficients, which I'll show you what that looks like here in a second. So you can scroll down. We have manifold switch closed for DOD, manifold switch open for DOD, and manifold switch open, right? So we can make adjustments to all of these and then click on calculate coefficients and it will make adjustments in the tune file. So I'm going to close this and I'm actually going to open up the coefficients. So I'm going to go to engine, I'm going to go to airflow, and I'm going to go to speed density. Now, if you look under VE coefficients, you can see where they have changed, right? And we were changing the actual table for manifold switch closed. So if you look, those values are now red because we increased them. So when you're making adjustments to the virtual VE editor, it's actually affecting the coefficients in the tune file. But that will not happen unless you click calculate coefficients. Excuse me. So just keep that in mind. The virtual VE editor is extremely helpful. Now, before you can use the VE editor properly, you have to fail the mass airflow. Now, on an LT4, there are some issues with that. However, LT1 cars, for example, you can fail the math, and then basically you would go to engine diagnostics, you go to airflow, and click on, or excuse me, change this, where did it go? Math frequency fail high, you would put that to 0 hertz. So if the ECU sees anything over 0 hertz, it's going to interpret the mass airflow sensor has failed, and it's going to default to the speed density strategy, right? So you must fail the math first. There's some other tables in there that you have to adjust as well, but just know that you have to fail the math for the GM to actually use the speed density logic. So this has been around for very many years, and for you guys who have been tuning GMs a long time, this is nothing new for you, okay? But just bear that in mind. All right, so moving on. If we go back under edit and we go to our virtual torque, this is also a super helpful table when tuning DI cars or Gen 5 GM platforms. So we can actually adjust what the torque calculation is going to be based on cylinder air mass, which is our y-axis, and engine speed, which is our x-axis. So you can make adjustments here. Let's say you put a big cam in the car, and at idle, your torque calculation is off. You can affect that torque calculation by making direct adjustments in here, and that will make adjustments in the tune file. This is very similar to the virtual VE editor in the sense that this is a tool which is not actually in the tune. It is a virtual representation of the torque coefficients, and it's allowing you to make adjustments, and then it's affecting the tune file after you click on extrapolate coefficients. So let's just say I added 10% to everything again, just for sake of showing you how it works. All right. So we're going to click on calculate torque tables, excuse me, click on extrapolate coefficients, and then calculate torque tables. All right. So now if you go back to the tune file and go to edit, engine, and you go to torque model, and you go to general, you can see where it affected for intake cam 0, right? So our intake cam being at base position, or in this case, there's no intake and exhaust cam, it's just one camshaft. So this is affecting our values with the cam at its base angle. Now, if you ask, well, what about when it's at different angles? So if you go back to edit, virtual torque, you can actually change the cam angle. Where did it go? So you can change it for 0, 7, 14, 21, 27 degrees. So if you still have a stock cam, you need to make adjustments per given cam angles, you can do that with the virtual torque editor. So pretty cool stuff, guys. It works really well too. And you really, to have a big cam and to make it run properly in these cars, the torque calculation is key, especially on the Gen 5 GM platforms. And this is going to help you dial that in. Also at wide open throttle, if you have an automatic vehicle, this is especially helpful because you need to get the torque calculation correct. Now, if you've calibrated the math correctly, if you've done all your other steps necessary, this is usually will fall in line pretty close, but sometimes it may not exactly work. So you can use the virtual torque editor to make adjustments so you're getting the proper torque calculation, so you're going to get proper amounts of line pressure and proper functionality from your transmission. So extremely helpful. There's more and more stuff I could cover. I could spend days talking about all the features there, but I just want to make sure you guys understand the power and functionality that you have at your fingertips with the VCM editor, if nothing else. All right, we have our gear tire wizard. All right, so if you have changed your tire size, you can actually change your tire size here. Let's say I put it at 28 and gear ratio stayed the same, so 3.42. Now there's options to adjust speedo calibration and options to scale transmission parameters. This is a manual transmission vehicle, so scaling the transmission parameters is not really going to help me in this case. However, I do want to adjust my speedo calibration. I'm just going to keep them both clicked anyways. Click adjust, it will say adjustment complete. All right, so if you go back to the speedo tab under calibration, you're going to see driven tire circumference and non-driven tire circumference values have changed. Also, our VSS, our vehicle speed sensor, tire revs per mile is actually changed as well. So pretty cool stuff. It's doing it for you. It's doing the legwork. All you have to do is put in the values. Now, that brings me to another point. There's also a very helpful tool under unit conversion. Or you can click under tools, unit conversion as well. But nonetheless, you have a dynamic calculator or dynamic converter under here, which is pretty awesome. So you can change from meters per second squared to meter per second squared, kilometer per second squared to meter per second squared. And that's talking about acceleration. But you have all of these other values which you can find, and you can, okay, if you have no one given value, you want to change it to a different unit of measure, then you can do that. So that's kind of cool. You also have a tire size calculator, which is what most of you guys will probably use this table for, if nothing else. So you can put in the metric sizing, and then you can get your tire diameter from that. So if I put in 355, 30, 19, which is a Kumo X to V720, which I use that tire a lot in a lot of the Corvettes because they're a great 200 treadwear tire for you guys that road race and stuff like that. You know what I'm talking about. But the actual tire height is 27.4. So just giving it the metric sizing will give you the diameter once you put in the proper data. There's a lot of other features in here that are really helpful. Current injector flow, let's say it's 42 pounds per minute or per hour, excuse me. Current injector pressure, or current fuel pressure, 58 psi. Your new fuel pressure, let's say it's 43.5 psi. Now your actual new injector flow is going to be lower because you've lowered your fuel pressure. So this is using Bernoulli logic and telling you the new value, right? So pretty cool that it can do that for you. Saves you some time. A lot of time nowadays, you're going to have the injector data there for you, but if not, you can use that as well. All right, so that's pretty cool. Very helpful feature. Now, we are talking about GM right now. Now, if you're talking about Fords under the Edit tab also have a lot of very helpful features. Like I said, the torque inverse calculator is critical. Yeah, I mean, even 4 or 5 years ago, we did not have that. And so it made dialing in the Fords a lot more cumbersome, a lot more time consuming. And now that we have the virtual torque calculator, it makes our lives so much easier. I mean, busting out Excel, putting in these values here, spinning out this new inverse torque table here, and having to rescale it based on whatever your axis values were, it was a pain, right? So now we don't have to do that. It's all housed right here in the VCM editor under that edit tab. That edit tab is going to save you so much time. It's unreal. All right. In addition to that, the virtual torque, you also have the ETC effective area inverse calculator. So we have our desired throttle angle, and then we can actually find the inverse of that table using that calculator as well. So another very helpful tool. The EcoBoost have some other turbo-based calculations or calculators you can use there as well, which are also very, very helpful. And now even with Ford, you have its own virtual VE editor as well. It's just a little bit different, but it works in a similar concept, right? But Ford is using a different type of equation versus GM, right? GM's using polynomial, and I believe Ford is using quadratic equations to determine cylinder air mass. But obviously, we're not getting into that today, but that is a difference. But hptuners gives you the ability to change the speed density values even on Fords now under that edit tab. So that's extremely helpful. And last but not least, of course, Dodge. I'm sitting in a Dodge right now. I tune a lot of Dodge vehicles at my shop. So the neural network trainer is a very helpful tool as well. So, I mean, nobody else has that in the industry. So that's extremely awesome that we have that ability now. So thank you, but hptuners. But anyways, moving forward. All right. So we talked about the edit. We talked about the different tools we have there. You also have user-defined parameters. All right, so user-defined parameters are for certain applications, certain tuners that are doing different things. So you can actually add in your own table now. So if you know the table location, the hex address, you can add that in. You can make your template, and then you can actually import it from Tuner Pro, right? So you can create your XDF file in Tuner Pro and import that into the VCM editor. So you build it in Tuner Pro and then you import it through the user-defined parameters. So if you have a table that you want to modify, that you may not necessarily want other people to know you have this table, whatever it may be, it's hard to say. The possibilities are endless, but if you have that ability, you can do it. So if you have A2L files or hex, whatever, you can do that. So that gives you the ability. It gives you a lot of freedom and flexibility to be able to kind of do what you need to do if you have that functionality there. So the user-defined parameters are extremely helpful for that. Template applicator. So if you tune a lot of the same vehicle, a lot of the same packages, you actually have the ability to create a template, right, using the template editor. So you can take, okay, I'm going to use the same mass airflow calibration because I'm using the same intake tube, let's say for Fords, for example, or even GM. So if you want to import that MAF calibration without having to do the legwork, you can actually use the template applicator to do that for you. So that's extremely helpful if you're tuning a lot of the same vehicles and a lot of the same packages time and time again. So just another thing that hptuners is doing to be able to make your lives easier. All right. So that gets me more so to my next topic. So yeah, navigator, basic. So talking about the basic versus advanced view. I'm going to backtrack just a little bit, then I'll go talk about the compare function because I was really going to talk about the compare. But nonetheless, if you go under view, you have the option to view basic or view advanced. So right now I'm in advanced. So if I click on engine and I click on torque model in general, we can see all these values right here because we are in advanced. So advanced is going to give you access to anything which hptuners has in the definition for you to be able to see, right? If you go back to edit and you go to view, you go to basic, okay, it requires you to close and reopen parameter viewer to be able to see the changes take effect. All right, so I'm going to close this, go back to engine, and you don't even have torque model available to view because it's a pretty advanced portion of the tune, which most of you beginning tuners probably aren't going to be modifying that or tuning the car at that level. So that's something they don't give you access to unless you want it. So it's just trying to simplify the view for you. So if you're really just trying to focus on, fuel, air, spark, basically, so to speak, it's just going to give you options to look at and modify a minimal amount of tables that you need to adjust in order to achieve your desired result. Now, if you're using basic and you are not getting your desired result, it's possible that you need to view it in advance. And so you can actually change more tables to get your desired result. So again, we're going to close this, go back to edit, go back to view, and go to advanced. Okay, go back to engine, and now it's all available again. So that's how that works. All right, so the compare tool is extremely helpful as well. So I'm going to click on compare. I'm going to open compare file, and I'm going to open a file from my car once I had methanol, I had nitrous, I had heads, cam, headers, a lot of stuff going on there, right? So let's see here. All right, so now I'm actually comparing, and you can see here where tables have changed, right? So if you see, let's go under engine, spark, advance, you click on high octane, or not click on it, but look at it, you can see where it's green. That means that your table and that table are two different things, right? So within there, if you click on it, and you click on compare, you can see where it's different, okay? So if I copy that table from the compare, so right here, show compare, and show main, and I paste it to the main, and I close it, it's now going to be solid red, meaning that it is now the same as whatever table I'm comparing with the other tune file. Now let's say I go make a change. All right, so I add 2 degrees of timing. All right, I'm going to close it again, and now it's red and green, almost like Christmas, right? We all love Christmas. So now you have actually, your table that you are viewing and modifying in your main file is now different than when it started, but it's also different than the compare table that you have open, or the compare file that you have open, and that table is now different from all three. So there's 3 different tables you're working with pretty much at that point, in a sense. So that's kind of how that works. So it just gives you a good visual representation of what is going on. And so it's extremely helpful to have that ability to view that when need be. All right. So another thing you can do, which is really cool to compare a function, go back to compare and go to view comparison log. If I view comparison log, it's actually going to give me a drop down list of all the changes or all the differences between my main file and the compare file. So this is also a way that you can, when you're tuning a lot of different vehicles, but using the same modifications, you can also compare with a file from another car, which you've already done, and you can literally right click, copy over selected differences, and that will change just the idle RPM. If I right click, copy over selected for torque, it's going to change that as well. So if I go to idle and I have RPM, you see now we're solid red. So this table is going to match my table I'm comparing with. So that's pretty cool. You can also right click, copy over all differences. So if your file that you're comparing with is the same operating system, same year, same model, it's auto versus you have auto, you can actually copy over all the differences if you really wanted to. I kind of try to shy away from it unless it has a very specific need, or I know 100% without fail that that file I'm comparing with is a valid file, is the same operating system as what I'm working with, and so on and so forth. So if I have all those stars aligned, then I'm going to copy over all differences, but I typically try not to do that. And even if I do that, I'm still going to go through each tab and look at the differences and actually open it up and make sure that those changes were made. You just a way to just double check everything. Obviously, we always like to double check, triple check. I'm try to be pretty thorough in everything I do. So it's just something to think about. So go back to view comparison log. Again, we can scroll down. We can see all the differences from our tune file to the tune file we are comparing with. So pretty cool stuff right there. Under the compare, you also have a segment swapper. So that segment swapper is more for you guys out there. Let's say you had a truck, a Silverado, and it had a 4L60 originally, and it was a 5.3. Now let's say you put a 6.0 and 4L80 in it, right? Because you had a donor truck, a 3/4 ton, whatever it may be, and you took all that drivetrain and you put it in your truck now. So the segment swapper allows you to compare with another file from, let's say, that 3/4 ton Silverado and your 1/2 ton Silverado, and you can go and look at whatever segment you need. So for one being the transmission, obviously this is a manual, so you're not gonna be able to see that. But in the automatic transmission, you can go see the automatic transmission segment, which is its own operating system ID, and you can copy over that segment specifically as opposed to copying over everything. So that will change the OS pretty much completely, and then you can flash it and then see how it works. So that's extremely helpful for those types of scenarios. For you guys that are swapping vehicles, also doing older vehicles like resto mods, things like that, you can use some of this functionality to your advantage, right? So very cool stuff under the compare tab. It's extremely helpful in trying to make your life just a little bit easier. All right. And one thing I want to add to is the fact that like HP tuners, if you need some more functionality or if you need something, you can always contact support. And in my experience, I've always had great luck with being able to get somewhere. If I say, hey, you guys, this is great. I think, what if we tried this? Or what if we added this feature? They will definitely take that to heart. They will write it down and they will talk about it. I've been in the meetings where they're always trying to talk about adding more functionality. So that's what I love. It's just very progressive, always trying to improve. It's pretty awesome, so to be a part of that. And I'm very thankful for that. So I hope you guys can, reap the benefits of that as well. So moving on here, flash functionality and considerations. So we've talked about the edit tab, we've talked about compare, now we're on the flash. So if you go to flash, you go to right vehicle, you're going to see all the different controllers which we have the ability to flash. Now, this is where the considerations come into play. When you are originally reading out a tune file from a car, you need to figure out what controllers you actually want to be able to modify. Now, if you read out the chassis control module, which is what this has right here, and the engine control module, it's going to ask you to license both the chassis control module and the engine control module because you read them out. So you go to flash it, it's going to ask you to license it. Now, that could require more credits. Now, a very cool feature that they've recently added is you have the ability, let's say you accidentally read out all the modules. Now you can go back, go to edit, go to calibration details, go to controllers, and you can literally remove a controller now. That is huge, guys, because in the remote tuning world, you know, I have a lot of customers, they read out their files, they send it to me, and I'm like, oh man, you read out your trans tune, and we're not tuning the trans. Like, oh man. So then they would have to go back and reread it. And now with this feature, they don't have to do that. You can just remove that controller and then you're good to go, right? Just go flash it. Well, you remove it, resave it, and flash it. So double click to remove. Okay, so we're going to remove the chassis control module. Cool. Now it's going to ask you to resave. So stock tune, no CCM test. All right. So if now we have to reopen it. So stock tune, no CCM test. Now it automatically opens back up our tune details and controller details, and now you see where there's no controller, or excuse me, there's no chassis control module. Now, if you wanted to add a different controller, let's say another time we read out some other module, well, you can add that as well. So you can select whatever module you had read. Now, in this particular case, you can't have read multiple modules. So let's say you read out the chassis control module by itself, and you read out the engine control module by itself. If you're trying to add a controller back in, you can't add a file which includes the engine control module and the chassis control module. So just keep that in mind. Otherwise, it will not work that way. So nonetheless, it's going to save you from having to reread everything back out without that module in there. So that's a cool feature. It's saved me a lot of time already. So pretty cool. All right. So also some other things to think about when you're going to flash the vehicle. First and foremost, you want to make sure you have solid connection, right? You make sure that you have, you know, the USB ports plugged in correctly. There's nothing going on. You're not going to obstruct its connection mid-flash. Because if you do, that could break your ECU or just cause you to have to recover it, which is just going to take you extra time and cause more frustration. So you guys want to keep that in mind when you're getting to it, all right? So moving on from that, right? So useful tools. Some other useful tools that we have are the options. We can change it from metric to native. We can also tuner lock some certain files. We can also load last tune on startup. So for you guys that are overseas, they use a different unit measure. You can change your unit measure right there under the options tab. All right. You also have the template editor. So that's where you would actually create your template in which you can apply it under the edit tab, right? So also extremely helpful in doing whatever you need to do. All right. So moving forward, you also have the calculator. The calculator is just a basic calculator, but that's useful if you need it for when you're in a bind. All right. Other than that, we already talked about unit conversion. That's extremely helpful. So really, those are your main tools that you're going to have at your disposal. So viewing options. For viewing options under window, you can change the orientation of how you're going to view the tables. Now, I typically don't change this, don't mess with it, but if it's helpful for you, you can change it to tile horizontal, tile vertical, or a cascading view. So it just really depends on your computer, how big it is, how big your screen is, and how it looks and makes sense to you. All right. So other than that, we also have our help tab. So under help, you have your MPVI1, MPVI2, MPVI1 application keys. So this is actually where you're going to see your application keys listed. So I have a lot here because I deal with a lot of different pieces of hardware. So I have a lot. You may have none if you're using NPVI2. So if you need to use an NPVI1 from somebody, you'll need to input the application key right there. And then you'll add key and then it should work unless you've erroneously entered the application key or it's an old application key. All right. So if you go to under help, go to NPVI2 verification code, we're now going to see our serial number and our verification code pop up. This is a way to test and make sure that you have proper communication with your NPVI2. And I do. So that's good. But one of the most helpful features under the help tab, no pun intended, is going to be your resync, right? So you should also do a resync pretty much anytime that you add credits through your portal on hptuners.com, but you should also do a resync when you change your device. So that way hptuners knows, okay, I'm not using this NPVI1 anymore. Now I'm using this shiny new NPVI2. And so you click on that, click on resync, and then it's going to work. And it's going to say resync completed and close. Now it's going to ping the server and make sure everything's working. It's going to say, hey, he added 4 credits. So you should see 4 credits added if you had added credits and you have not resynced yet. So another very helpful tool from hptuners to keep you going in the right direction. All right. So you can also click on VCM Suite Information. And you click on I again. This is going to gather VCM Suite information. Now, if you are plugged into your car and you have the key on, you're able to read data from the car. You can also see controller information from your car, operating system information, diagnostic trouble codes, and this is going to be the info log. Now, if you guys are talking to support and you say, hey, you need to submit a trouble ticket, I'm having a problem, one of the main things they're going to ask you for is that info log, right? So I'm going to turn the key on here, and I'm going to do this again. So you can either go to help and go to VCM Suite Information, or you can click on the little eye icon for get VCM Suite Info, and then you're going to gather VCM Suite information. So it's collecting information right here. All right. Now you're seeing a lot of different controllers here. These are a bunch of different controllers that I've modified or that I've tuned on this particular piece of hardware. So there's a lot there. My apologies. But if you get down here, you're going to see information from the car. So these are some DTCs which are permanent. It's going to show our VIN. It's 2019 Dodge Challenger RT 392, 6.4 liter wide body, which is pretty awesome. These things look awesome, guys. If you haven't seen one yet, they're pretty cool. We just put a Pro Charger on this guy, built the motor, fuel system. I mean, it's going to be cool. I haven't really tuned it fully yet, but it's a pretty cool car. But nonetheless, you're going to save that info and you're going to send that in the email to support whenever you may have an issue. So if they ask you for an info log, now you guys know where to find that. It's extremely helpful in helping us to try to help you solve your problem that you're seeing. All right, so I'm gonna shut the key off here. Really, the help tab, subcategories, application keys, we've talked about all this stuff. So it's all working really good. The resync. Now that brings us to the meat and potatoes of the actual tune file. All right, so we talked a little bit about this, and we're going to be in tab view. If you guys remember, there's tree view and there's tab view. If we go under engine, we have our other subcategories, excuse me. So under general, we have our number of cylinders, cylinder volume. You have idle, RPM, torque. Let's go to spark map because you guys know about spark. So if we go to engine, spark, advance, go to high octane. Again, cylinder air mass on the y-axis, RPM on the x-axis, right? So now you can, just like I showed you guys, you can see 3D and 2D in the virtual VE editor. You can also see 3D and 2D in the spark map, which is very helpful because you don't want a jagged looking spark map. It's got to be somewhat smooth for the most part, depending on your application. So if we're looking at here, we can see this is going to be wide open throttle, right? And let's say from 3,000 RPM and up. So that's your wide open throttle range. So if you're going to add 2 degrees or take 2 degrees away, whatever it may be, you're going to go in there, highlight the table, the part of the table in which you want to modify, add 2, boom, you've added 2 degrees timing. Now you can also interpolate, which is pretty awesome, interpolating between vertical bounds. So that basically takes the value above it, takes the value below it, finds the average, boom, that's your center value, right? So you also have interpolate between horizontal bounds. So that allows you, does the same thing, left to right, finds the average, that's your middle value. So this allows you to smooth the table, make it progressive, make it look how it should, because timing shouldn't jump around by more than like 6 degrees at the very most, right? So it should be pretty progressive and smooth. As you increase cylinder air mass, your spark advance is going to reduce, right? So moving forward, that was the high octane. You can also do the same thing to the low octane spark table as well. So let's go to fuel. Engine, fuel, power enrich. If you go to our desired EQ ratio, this is going to be our desired air fuel essentially, right? So to figure out what the desired air fuel is going to be, you're going to go to tools, bust out that calculator, 14.7, and divided by, let's say we're going to be at 4,600 RPM, 1.165. That equals 12.6 parts air to 1 part fuel. Now, you guys may be asking, well, it's going to have ethanol content, so maybe the stoic is 14.1. Well, that doesn't matter because we're looking in terms of AFR equivalents of 1 lambda, right? So basically, that 4600 value, that 1.165, that means it's going to command a 16.5% richer mixture at that RPM than 1 lambda. So you could look at that in lambda as well. But if we look at your typical wideband, is going to spit out an air fuel ratio equivalent of 1 lambda, unless you change the scaling on that, of course. So, if it's an AEM or whatever it may be, instead of reading 1 lambda, it may read 14.7. Even though you may have 10% ethanol content, it gets really confusing really fast, guys. So it may be easier for you to look at information in terms of lambda so you don't get confused about ethanol content and the effects that it's going to have on your stoic AFR. Now, that stoic AFR table, you may be saying, well, this is a 14.1 car. Well, granted, that all that really is doing is scaling up the desired injection pulse width based on the amount of ethanol content. But for our terms of our calculations and determining our EQ ratio, that is not applicable here, right? So we're going to still use an AFR equivalent of 1 lambda, because if we're viewing an AFR, we're going to use 14.7 divided by this EQ ratio number to get us our desired air fuel ratio, which is again spitting out an AFR equivalent of lambda, right? Ethanol content is not applicable there, okay? And you guys can also feel free to contact me about this for further explanation. But it's, once you start wrapping your head around it, it's pretty simple, it's pretty straightforward. But nonetheless, some things to think about for you guys. So moving on, so we have engine. Now we also have engine diagnostics. Under engine diagnostics, you have many other tabs. So you have general, you have airflow, which this is, again, is going to be where you're going to go to fail the mass airflow sensor. So if you're going to fail it, put it to 0 hertz. Mass frequency fail low, it's going to be 14,500, right? You can also disable some of your airflow tests. So the ECU is constantly looking at the airflow coming in versus mass versus throttle position, or it's going to look at speed density airflow versus mass airflow. And if there's too much fluctuation or differential or difference between one or the other that goes outside of an acceptable bound, then it's going to say, oh, there's a problem, like P0101, P0106, P0121, P1514, so on and so forth. There's a lot of checks and balances going on. Now, if you modify a car heavily, some of those checks and balances are no longer going to be valid. They're not going to be correct. So in that situation, you're going to have to make some adjustments to these acceptable parameters. Or telling the ECU, it's okay. You can see a wider range of airflow differential because of whatever given reason it may be. So just keep that in mind. So you guys will have to make some adjustments to the engine diagnostics airflow tab. In addition to that, we have pressure, misfire. Let's say you put a big, nasty cam in this thing. Sometimes the misfire monitor is not going to be valid anymore. So that data is not going to be correct. So it's going to flash the check engine light at you. It's going to think it's misfiring, but really it's not misfiring. It's just because it's a byproduct of the camshaft. And at that point, you have to rely on your ability to determine if it's actually a misfire. So there's many other ways you can do that. We can say, as we call it, shoot the tube, get a thermal gun, and look at the actual temperature on each primary of the header and see if you have a cold cylinder. That's an easy way to determine if you have a misfire. If you have that misfire at idle, if you're really down a cylinder, you'll be able to see it that way. Now, you may have a misfire at wide open throttle, under load. It's going to be harder to find that issue because the misfire monitor is no longer active. So you might have to make these values really high because let's say you don't have any misfires and it's just flashing at you, or flashing at your customer. Even worse, your customer thinks, oh, there's a problem, when really there isn't a problem. It's because that the calculation just isn't valid anymore, right? Because race card. Just kidding. But nonetheless, the biggest one, you have DTCs, which you can modify. As you modify a car more heavily, race the car, off-road it, whatever it may be, you're going to have different DTCs, which you may need to disable because you have modified that car. Let's say on a Ford, you remove the IMRC, intake manifold runner control. So you're going to throw a code for the intake manifold runner control, circuit high or open, whatever it may be. So you can actually go into your DTCs and modify them accordingly based on the adjustments or modifications you've made to the car. So the DTC icon is extremely helpful in allowing you to do that. Under trans, this is a manual, but you can disable computer aided gear shift. So disable TPS, I'm going to put that to 0. So above this throttle position, CAGS or CAGS or skip shift is no longer going to be active. You can also put your minimum coolant to 300 degrees, something really high, just to make sure that your adjustment is going to take place. Going to fuel system, you have a lot of information here. In this particular case, I'm going to set my maximum pressure limits higher because I'm modifying the low side of the car and I want to see a higher pressure. And so I don't want it to limit it at all. So I'm going to put the whole entire table to 560 kPa. So that way, we're not going to see that limitation on fuel pressure. If you want to change your unit of measure, you can click on kPa. It will change it to MPa, which is megapascals, or inches mercury, or PSI, which you guys may be more familiar with. So now our max fuel pressure on the low side, because it's the DI car, right? So you have a low side and you have a high side. On the low side, the max pressure is now 81 PSI. So let's say you put an auxiliary fuel pump on it or some other type of fuel system. It's not going to try to limit it down. So that's extremely helpful. You also have high pressure desired. So if you've put a different high pressure fuel pump in this car, you can actually change your desired fuel pressure on the high side as well. So all kinds of different adjustments you can make under this tab, but it's extremely helpful, especially with direct injection vehicles. Under system, you have fans, you have general, like alternator. This is going to be different configuration data stored here. And again, going back to my P59 controller statement, the blue and green connector, like on an 04 Silverado, let's say you have a manual or cable-driven throttle body versus electronic throttle, that table, that binary table, is going to be housed under the system tab. So you can put a 0 for ETC. So now you have a cable-driven throttle body. It's going to allow you to change that. Now, newer controllers, obviously, we can't do that, sadly. So that's just something that you're not going to have the ability to do. But under system tab, the main thing that you're going to be using most likely is going to be the fan control. So you can change your desired engine coolant temperature, your desired duty cycle based on coolant temperature to suit your needs. So if you put a 170-degree thermostat in here, for example, you can bump up your duty cycle. Let's say I just want to increase it 15% up until 221 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm just going to increase 15%, and that's going to be that, right? So depends on what you're doing, but I'm just trying to show you guys some examples of how you can use the system tab to help you out. Under the system tab, you're also going to have intercooler pump control. So certain supercharged vehicles with intercooler pumps, you can change the desired IAT in which it enables the intercooler pump to become active. So if you want to change that, you want to bring the intercooler pump on as soon as possible, you can go under the system tab and you can do that depending on what you're doing. So that's extremely helpful in certain situations where you need to use it. So also AC, you can change your disable RPM for air conditioning as well. A lot of different options there. Under Speedo, let's talk about that as well. So you guys are going to be using the Speedo tab a lot because let's say you change your final drive ratio in your car. So it was a 342, now it's a 410 rear end. Well, you can actually go in there and adjust that final drive ratio and put in that 410 value. Now, the Corvette, for example, you're probably not going to do that. But let's say it's a Mustang, 3-valve Mustang. Very popular adjustment or modification is to change it from a 331 to 410 or 392, whatever it may be. So you would go under final drive ratio, change that. There's also an additional switch you need to adjust on 3 valves, just FYI, for that change to actually take effect. But it just depends on what application you're working with and what you're going to have to do to achieve your desired result. Also, under a Speedo tab, you have the limiter. The limiter, right now, this is set to GM-LAN. So this limiter actually isn't valid because it's not using the limiter that's here. It's using GM-LAN. So it's another part of the tune where it's referencing to determine what the actual speed limiter is. Now we can change this to calibration, and then we could set our speed limiter to 220 miles per hour, whatever it may be. Right? We're doing a Texas mile. For example, with the when the 15 Mustangs first came out, the S550s, we couldn't go above 186 miles per hour. It's hard coded, and now we have a patch which you can apply. And to be able to do that, you would go to that OS tab, right? Now it's not going to be in this because this is a 17 Corvette, but under the OS tab on the S550s, you have the ability to apply that speed limiter patch. So now in the Texas mile, we can go above 186. That was not fun, guys. We had no idea that was going to happen, and we hit that limit, and we were losing our minds. So thank you, hptuners, and the guys over there in the Ford department for figuring that out for us, because we like to go fast in Texas, right? So, I mean, everybody likes to go fast, but nonetheless, very cool to have that capability. So the OS tab, we didn't talk a whole lot about that, but the OS tab also gives you the ability to go to a 2-bar or 3-bar custom OS, which is very helpful as well, like especially with GMs for the older controllers where you don't have the virtual VE, where it has a traditional VE table, like that O2 Camaro we talked about, on the first episode, first live training class, we had a traditional VE table. So if we wanted to tune that car for 2-bar or 3-bar, we would have to go in to the OS tab, click on 2-bar custom OS or 3-bar custom OS, and then we go back to the VE table, and boom, we've got more resolution. We can tune up to 3-bar. Also, that custom OS will allow you to do some real-time tuning on the older controllers, which is actually going to access or affect the random access memory, not the read-only memory. So when we flash a car, we're affecting the read-only memory, not the random access memory. But if you have live tuning capabilities, you're actually going to be adjusting the random access memory. You're going to have to save that and apply that in the tune file, and then flash the car again. And now that will affect the read-only memory. So kind of cool. Just keep that in mind. Really, and then the only other thing that I really want to talk about is this favorites. If you click on favorites, now I don't usually use it, but if I select the tune file, or excuse me, a table, which I want to make a favorite, I'll go to Spark, High Octane, and I can add this to my favorite list, right? So added, right? Go back to favorites. Boom, my high octane Spark table is now there under my favorites. So kind of a cool little feature as well. There's a lot more that I could get into and talk about, you guys, but we only have so much time in a day, to talk about this stuff. But nonetheless, we're nearing the end of our class, and we are going to ask the question now. So the question is, what tab is the virtual VE editor located under? Again, that question is, which tab is the virtual VE editor located under? I'll give you guys a few minutes. What's the name? Can you text it to me? Message me? Sorry, guys, I can't hear the winner. Give us 1 second. Leo Vakage. All right, Leo, congratulations. You are a winner. Please be sure to email marketing@hptuners.com and give them your screen name. Again, it's going to be marketing@hptuners.com. Give them your YouTube screen name, and they will get you set up with your MPVI2 with your 2 credits. I really appreciate every one of you listening along, being attent, and hopefully you guys have taken something away from this. Even you HP Tuners pros out there, hopefully I've showed you something that will help you and make your lives easier. And also, we're going to continue to do this. We've got a lot of great content coming down the pipe, and we're really happy to be able to do this with you guys. All right, so I really want to thank you for tuning into the hptuners live stream training. Again, I'm Alex Peitz of Peitz Performance Tunes, and also you can keep up with my latest builds on my YouTube channel under Alex Peitz, and also at Peitz Performance for Instagram, all right, and Facebook as well. So again, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate your everything that you guys do, and I am greatly looking forward to seeing you again. Until then, stay tuned.